Hey everybody, Alex Newman here with the New American. Welcome to Conversations That Matter. This conversation really matters. With us today, a very special guest, my friend Frank de Varona. If we went through his entire biography, we would spend literally all of our time. We've only got 20 minutes, so we're going to do an extremely abbreviated version. His biography starts in Cuba. At the age of 17, he actually invaded Cuba as part of the Bay of Pigs operation to try to liberate that nation from the brutal tyranny that had descended on it. Since then, he has done more things than you could possibly imagine. He's been a high-ranking top official in the Miami-Dade County public school system. He's been a professor at Florida International University. He has written more than 25 books, 500 articles. He and I both serve as directors for Bear Witness Central. He's received all kinds of awards, including the Cross of Royal Order of Isabel la Católica with the rank of commander. That's the highest rank. He received the Imperial Byzantine Order of Constantine the Great, also with the rank of commander, and the Great Cross of Knight of National Brotherhood of the Monarchy of Spain in 2015. He has met 5 U.S. presidents. He actually helped run Donald Trump's Miami-Dade campaign in Florida, which was, of course, critical to his victory. So, I mean, Frank is just a man who has so many talents and skills and such a background. You can't even do it justice, even if we had the whole 20 minutes. But we'll leave it at that for now. Frank, thank you for joining us. The reason that I wanted you on today is because of what's going on in Cuba. I can't think of a better expert in this country to explain to us what's going on in Cuba. So tear through the fake media and the lies and the propaganda coming out of the Biden administration. What is happening in Cuba? What are the people in an uproar about? And what has been the response of the dictatorship?
Well, thank you, Alex, for having me here today. You and I have worked together on many issues, of course, especially attacking the globalists of the New World Order. But on July 11th, in a tiny little town called San Antonio de los Baños, with no planning, no pre-planning, people just couldn't take it anymore. There's no food, there's no medicine. People are dying of COVID-19. They have no medicine. And they just simply went to the streets crying for liberty, freedom, libertad, libertad, freedom to Cuba. And that spread that same day to 40 cities all over Cuba, from one end to the island to the other. So the response of the tyrannical regime, mass murder regime, was, of course, to destroy this rebellion all over Cuba. They never seen something like that in so many years. So the president of Cuba, Miguel Díaz-Canel, an assassin, he went on TV and he said, I'm asking every communist to take to the street. He sent the army, the police. They have a special unit called Brigada de Respuesta Rápida, Brigades of Rapid Response. They call them Avispas Negra. These are elite troops of murderers. They actually work under the Ministry of the Interior. They have their own army. And they went out and started shooting and killing people. And some of the videos that we have watched are horrible. I mean, you see a 13-year-old kid being shot in the head in the middle of the street. You see how the army breaks into home, kills the husband. The wife is screaming, and they pull the guy bleeding. They arrest people, young girls, and they rape them as soon as they get them. I mean, it's just one atrocity after the other, and still been going on. And then, of course, some of the demonstrations were peaceful, but of course they were beaten, they were being shot at. So then they responded. Now you see some people attacking some of the police. I saw a video jumping several people, beating police officers that were beating them, and also turning squad cars, and also looting stores. So there's been a response, a tremendous response. And of course, something very strange. Throughout the entire world, leftist people, for the first time, they're attacking the regime. Leftist Democrats in America, singers from Hollywood, they're always supported the Democrats. Now, you have all these people denouncing Cuba, but it's been a massive response worldwide, across the globe, practically. In every nation, you've had people demonstrating in favor of the Cuban people that are trying to get rid of this horrible tyranny that they have endured for more than 62 years.
Yeah, it's been incredible to see this, Frank, and it looks like just because of the internet and the way information travels now, they're having a hard time suppressing this. But something really interesting came out of the Biden administration. This was from Julie Chung, who is the Assistant Secretary for Western Hemisphere Affairs. And she said that protests are growing in Cuba as they're protesting against rising COVID and medicine shortages. I saw the people shouting, like you said, "Libertad" and down with communism. Are these people just protesting COVID, or is this a
No,
disinformation operation by the regime here in America?
disinformation. Nobody's saying give us COVID vaccines. They're saying libertad, libertad. They're not asking for food. They're not asking for medicine. They're asking for freedom and an end to the regime. That's what they're asking for. The rest is just propaganda. And one of the saddest things is that before this explosion in Cuba, this rebellion in Cuba, the Biden administration was ready to recognize Cuba, to send more diplomats to Cuba, to open consulates, to send more remittances to Cuba, and the government keeps like 10 to 15% or whatever you send. Send more tourists to an island full of COVID. That's what they were planning to do. That is why a guy by the name of Gonzalez, who works in the National Security Council by the administration, told CNN those were the plans. And even now, they are saying that they do want to send more diplomats. Why would you want to send diplomats to Cuba when in Cuba the Russians use this energy machine that they have to destroy the brain of our diplomats, their wives, and their kids, and also the Canadian diplomats? So why would you want to send more diplomats to Cuba so their brains can be destroyed? Because Russia is attacking us like that. In China, U.S. consulate, they're destroying the brains of our diplomats, also CIA agents. The Biden administration intelligence services, they have said that they have used that in the United States, in Washington, D.C., and in Miami. And now in Vienna, too, we're finding our diplomats, their brains are being destroyed. There's no pushback by the Biden administration. So we're going to have Putin and their thugs in Russia attacking us even more. When there's no response, there's more and more attacks. So it's a tragedy what's happening in Cuba, but it's a tragedy what's happening to Americans worldwide. Russia attacking us, destroying their brain. The Biden administration says over 120 diplomats and CIA agents, their brains have been destroyed. That's what the Biden administration is saying. So why in the world you want to send more diplomats to Cuba and open consulates in Cuba so more of them can lose their brains? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it is truly incredible. And, the Biden administration has claimed to be so concerned about the alleged insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th. I think it's worth remembering that the Castro regime was supporting terrorists in the United States, including the Weather Underground, who bombed the U.S. Capitol. And then the founder of that terrorist group that was taking money and direction from the Castro regime went on to launch the Obama presidency from his living room through the state Senate in Illinois and then the U.S. Senate. It's incredible the double standards that they have.
Ayers. Yeah, did that.
That's right, William Ayers. Yep, and we don't hear about that. It's okay to bomb the Capitol if the Cubans support it, but don't you dare do some vandalism and move things around. Then it's an insurrection. Frank, we're gonna have to go to a break in about a minute and 30 seconds. When we get back, I want to talk about something that is so important for Americans to understand about what happened in Cuba. It's something that you know better than probably anybody on the planet, except maybe the people involved, and that is the enormous role played by subversives in the United States, including globalists from the Council on Foreign Relations, in bringing the communist dictatorship to power in Cuba and then in keeping them in power in Cuba, even though they knew full well that Castro was a communist. Our ambassador there was warning. Our ambassador in Mexico was warning. And then they acted surprised when suddenly Fidel Castro openly announced that he was a communist. The story here is so critical. You and I have written about this in the New American magazine. We did a very in-depth history article a couple years ago, I believe. And also another thing I want to talk about when we get back from this short break, Frank, is the communist Chinese. Claire Lopez has just done a very important article where she talks about comments by one of the top officials in communist China about their desire to depopulate the United States, to get rid of maybe 100, maybe 200 million people so that the Chinese can have Lebensraum, room to stretch their legs. They need more territory, I guess. So stay with us. We will be back in just a moment. Hey everybody, thanks for sticking with us over that break. This is Alex Newman. These are Conversations That Matter for the New American Magazine, and I'm with my good friend Frank de Varona, a world expert, world leader on what's going on in Cuba. If anybody in America can break it down for us, it is Frank. He loves his original homeland so much that he risked his life at the age of 17 to set Cuba free from communism. Of course, they were set up to fail, and I want to talk a little bit about that. Frank, give us the condensed version of the history. How did Fidel Castro come to power? This is something that I think has really been forgotten, but give us some of the key people. Maybe talk about Herbert Matthews over at the New York Times, maybe the State Department. How did they bring Castro to power? And then how did they betray the young men who went to go liberate Cuba during the Bay of Pigs invasion so that Castro could consolidate his grip on power?
Sure. You and I wrote an article that you mentioned in the American talking about that. It was the globalists of the New World Order. Of course, we know that those are the ones that are serving in the Council of Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group, and so forth. It was them that wanted to put Castro in power. So they had spies in the Eisenhower administration, in the State Department, two of them, William Weiland, who was head of the Cuban desk, and also his boss, Roy Roboton, Assistant Secretary of Inter-American Affairs, 5 U.S. ambassadors sent cable after cable in 1958 saying, do not allow the 26th of July movement to come to power because Fidel Castro is a communist, Che Guevara is a communist, Raul Castro is a communist. They're going to be enemies of America if you let them come. And so they ignore all those cables because those two communists on the first floor stopped them. So that's how Castro came to power. Later on, Earl T. Smith, the last ambassador on the last ambassador on the Batista, stated in November of 1960, once Castro was in power, to the Senate Intelligence Committee, and he said, "Well, how did Castro come to power?" And he said it was due to the State Department and the press. You know, New York Times. We know that Herbert Matthews, who was a communist in 1957, he went to the mountains and interviewed Fidel Castro. Nobody knew who he was worldwide. He a series of articles in the New York Times, which is the voice of the Council of Foreign Relations, made Castro this big hero. He said George Washington of the Americas, Simon Bolivar is going to bring democracy and freedom to Cuba, and that's how a lot of people began supporting Castro. So once he was in power, now the Eisenhower administration wants to get rid of him, and they begin planning with the CIA, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, an invasion to Cuba. We're going to invade in Trinidad, next to the Escambray Mountains. He had piers, he had an infrastructure, it had a population that was anti-Castro, and more important, there were many rebels fighting the Escambray Mountains. But then what happens? The globalists in the administration, such as Dean Rusk, who for 10 years worked for the Rockefeller Foundation, they wanted us to lose. So they told Kennedy, change the landing site. Well, when he did change the landing site, we were doomed. And they sent us to the Bay of Pigs, where it was impossible to win there. So that was done by the globalists in the Kennedy administration, unfortunately. And he listened to them, and that's what happened. They sent us there to die and not to win. So it was criminal negligence, dereliction of duty, and high treason to the Cubans and to America, because we were also fighting for America, not just for Cuba. It was a horrible thing that happened, and Kennedy listened to all those globalists, and that's why we lost. We
Yeah.
could have won in Trinidad, as you and I explained in that article. There was a very good chance that we could have won had we landed there, had they not changed. There were only 1,500 of us. There were 220,000 enemy soldiers. So you couldn't change the plan one little bit and expect us to win. And they changed the entire plan, and that's why we lost.
Yeah. And when you know the background of the people involved and you look at the long pattern that we have seen from these individuals, what emerges is a clear picture. This was deliberate. This wasn't stupidity. This was absolutely part of the plan. And then what we got then was a communist dictatorship on our shores that started putting Soviet missiles, nuclear missiles pointing at our shores. In fact, my uncle was over there in the Navy trying to blockade. I mean, they could literally see the guys on the Soviet ships. Unbelievable what happened. And Frank, so I know you believe that communist Cuba is still a national security threat to the United States, and I want to talk a little bit about how China comes into this, because China, of course, more and more is now the emerging new superpower. They're building up their military very rapidly. They're becoming increasingly aggressive. They want to invade Taiwan. They're very close allies of the murderous dictatorship in Cuba, so of course they have a vested interest in propping that up. Should Americans be concerned about what's happening in Cuba? Is it really a national security threat? And how do the Communist Chinese play into this?
Well, it's an extremely national security danger to America, not only with China, from Russia as well, that is providing Cuba with nuclear submarines, also with space technology capability, uh, including cyber capability. They're really arming Cuba. The Chinese Navy is also using Cuba. And China, of course, it's our biggest enemy. And this article that you mentioned by Claire Lopez, she mentions how this general, Shi Haoshan, who was Minister of Defense from 1993 to 2003, he's talking like the Nazis. We need more space. So he's saying we need to kill maybe 100 to 200 million Americans so then we can colonize the United States. He's saying also that Australia, Canada, and America are the only countries that have a lot of space for the Chinese to colonize. So this is a minister of education talking about killing us. Of course, we know about this virus that was manufactured in the Wuhan bioterrorist lab. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't from bats. It was done by the Chinese to destroy the world and to hurt America. They threw the virus to do that to us. So we have the whistleblowers already mentioning that. So yeah, we are in tremendous danger. Uh, China is an existential threat to America, but in Cuba, it's only 90 miles away. And there you have China, and there you have Russia. And that is why it's going to be so difficult for the brave people of Cuba to get rid of communism, because not only they have to fight the local communists from Cuba, they also have to fight China and they have to fight Russia. And now we also find out that Chinese soldiers are training the army in Cuba on how to kill and repress the Cuban people. So they're already there. Chinese trainers are already doing that. And where's the Biden administration? Silent, nothing, no response. So that is an immense danger that we're facing from Cuba, directly from Cuba, because it's China and Russia that are inside Cuba, not just Cuba.
Yep. And then we have, of course, the Cuban dictatorship spreading this wickedness across the continent. They're spreading it into Venezuela, and from Venezuela all across South America. This is like a cancer growing in
Yes.
the Western Hemisphere. Frank, we've only got about 2 minutes left of this interview. I want to ask you, in those last 2 minutes, what can and what should Americans be doing? Of course, we can pray, but what should an average American who's concerned about this threat to our national security, who's concerned about the ongoing massacres of Cuban patriots who want to bring down this tyranny, what can they do?
Well, actually, they need to write to all the Republicans in Congress, because I don't think the Democrats are going to help you. Maybe one or two might, like Senator Menendez, who is a Democrat from New Jersey. He's very aware that Cuba is a danger. He is the one that's also putting pressure on the Biden administration to do something on Cuba. Number one, we need to restore internet in Cuba immediately. Our own governor of Florida has said to the Biden administration, Florida can do it. You don't need to spend any money. We can do it, but he hasn't authorized our government to do that. We need to bring internet to Cuba so we know what's happening there right now. Number one. Number two, America needs to work with the European Union, with the Organization of American States, to put severe economic sanctions to Cuba, not just war declarations. That doesn't help. It has to be strong sanctions. So long as you're killing people, so long as you keep them in jail, we're not going to trade with you. We need to do an embargo to Cuba from the European Union, from all the Organization of American States. Cuba would listen to such a threat, not to just verbal declarations. So there's a lot that the Biden administration can do, working with other countries like the European Union, even though they've never been helpful to Cuba. OAS, we do have a secretary of the OAS that is helpful, Luis Almagro. He at least is helpful, knowing the threat of Cuba. That's what we need to do, work with our allies, put pressure, because we are talking about the security of the United States. The security of the United States is in danger with communist Cuba there and China and Russia inside Cuba, 90 miles away. That's what the Biden administration needs to do. And every American needs to write to their governors, to senators, to congressmen in Congress, and bring about as much pressure as possible, because it's, after all, it's our lives. If China were to conquer America or kill us, we would all be slaves. Democrats, Republicans, communists, Republican, conservative will all be slaves of China. Those of us that are alive, because I said they want to kill up to 200 million Americans. So it is a tremendous threat. And I'm glad we're doing this program so we can alert people who are listening to this program so they take some action.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Frank. We appreciate your time, folks. That's Frank de Varona. You can find him all over the place. This guy's written dozens of books, hundreds of articles. Look him up. You won't be disappointed. Thank you, Frank. Thanks, folks, for listening. I'm Alex Newman. This is Conversations That Matter for the New American Magazine, and God bless you all.